Have you ever witnessed a scene so unexpected it brought the world around you to a standstill? Imagine walking into a bustling city diner and seeing a small, hungry child, her clothes thin and worn, her face smudged with the grime of the streets, asking not for a handout, but for a chance to work for scraps. What would you do? Yell? Call the police? Ignore her? But what if I told you that what one man did next silenced every judgment and changed 3 lives forever? The midday sun beat down on the hot pavement, reflecting sharply off the chrome and glass of the storefronts lining the busy Chicago street. Inside Leo's diner, the air was thick with the comforting, greasy aroma of sizzling bacon, fresh coffee, and grilled onions. It was the peak of the lunch rush. Every booth was filled. Waitresses hurried past, balancing heavy plates, and the clatter of cutlery mixed with the lively hum of conversation. Outside, the reality was starkly different. Maya, with her 9 years of life already etched onto a face that had seen too much, watched it all from across the street. Her threadbare T-shirt hung loosely on her small, thin frame, and her deep-set eyes, startlingly clear and intelligent, followed every plate of food that emerged from the kitchen. She didn't beg for money. She never begged, but a gnawing, burning hunger was a constant companion. She didn't cry or speak. She just watched. No one noticed her, or perhaps they chose not to. Drivers in their air-conditioned cars glanced away. Pedestrians on their lunch breaks hurried past, their eyes fixed on their phones. It was easier to pretend she wasn't there. But she was, as she was most days, a silent sentinel of a world most people preferred to ignore, waiting for someone to offer the one thing she would never dare to take. For a few minutes, she just observed the theater of everyday life. A young woman in a booth by the window meticulously photographed her avocado toast. A man in a business suit laughed loudly into his phone. A small child threw a tantrum because he didn't want to eat his vegetables. Maya simply pressed her forearm against her empty stomach, took a deep, steadying breath, and began to cross the street. She moved slowly, with the careful, deliberate steps of someone carrying an invisible, heavy burden. She navigated the flow of traffic, sidestepped the rushing pedestrians, and came to a stop at the diner's glass door. A few customers inside noticed her. A young waiter, seeing her approach, immediately tensed, his brow furrowing in preemptive annoyance. She took 2 timid steps inside, her muddy sneakers leaving faint smudges on the clean, checkered floor. "Hey, kid," the waiter grumbled, holding up a hand as if to shoo away a stray animal. "You can't be in here." But before he could usher her out, Maya spoke. Her voice was quiet, thin, but it carried a firmness that cut through the diner's noise and seemed to make time itself pause. "Sir," she said, looking not at the waiter but past him toward the kitchen. "Can I wash dishes for the leftovers?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing, a punch to the gut of the room's casual comfort. A couple in a nearby booth stopped chewing. A woman raised her eyebrows in disbelief. The man on the phone let out a short, derisive laugh. The waiter hesitated, looking around, ready to escort her firmly out the door. But then, a voice came from the back of the diner. "Leave her be." It was Leo, the owner. A man with broad shoulders and a face etched with the lines of a hard life. He always wore a serious, unsmiling expression. He had been sitting at his usual table near the kitchen, observing everything in silence as he did every day. He wasn't a man known for his smiles or his conversation, but at that moment he stood up. He walked toward the front of the diner with steady, unhurried steps. He looked at Maya, then at the gawking customers, then back at the waiter. "Get her a plate," he said, his voice low but clear. "The number 3 special, same as that table over there." "Sir," the waiter began to protest. "But exactly the same," Leo repeated, his gaze unwavering. "And a glass of juice. She's having lunch." A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the diner. Someone coughed. Another person made a low, critical comment to their companion. The customer at table 3, a man in a polo shirt, glanced over and whispered something to the woman with him. She stifled a laugh behind her hand. Maya didn't seem to understand what was happening. She just stood there, frozen, her expression a mixture of fear, surprise, and a deeply buried gratitude. Leo knelt down to her level, his large frame making him seem even bigger next to her smallness. "Come on," he said gently, "you're eating with us." The little girl looked him directly in the eye. There were no tears, no smile, but she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acceptance. He guided her to a small, clean table in the corner. The customers went back to their meals, but the rhythm of the diner had changed. The chatter was more subdued now, the glances more frequent. The young waiter, still looking bewildered, brought the plate. A thick slice of meatloaf, a generous scoop of mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, and a side of cornbread. A tall glass of orange juice next to it. Maya clasped her hands together in her lap, as if about to say a prayer, but said nothing. She simply picked up the fork and began to eat. She ate slowly, carefully, without the frantic desperation one might expect. Each bite was deliberate, as if she were savoring a memory she knew might not last. Leo returned to his post by the counter, leaning against it, watching her in silence. A customer on his way out paused beside him. "You know," the man said in a low, critical tone, "you do that, and pretty soon this place will turn into a homeless shelter." Leo just looked at him, a long, steady look that said more than any words could. The man cleared his throat and hurried out the door. No one in the diner knew it then, but that quiet, hungry little girl was about to change everything, not just for Leo, but for the entire community that had chosen to look away. Maya ate in a small, focused bubble of silence. Her thin arms rested on the edge of the table. Her eyes were fixed on her plate, and the silverware held in her small, dirt-smudged hands trembled slightly from long disuse. There was no anxiety in her movements, no frantic rush to consume. Each forkful of mashed potatoes, each piece of meatloaf was lifted with a quiet reverence, as if the meal itself were a sacred ritual that could be revoked at any moment. For a few minutes, the diner seemed to slow down. Not that it stopped. Orders were still being called out to the kitchen, coffee was still being poured, but the atmosphere had shifted. The casual, thoughtless rhythm of the lunch rush had been replaced by a self-conscious awareness. The gazes, those were what had changed. They were all directed subtly or overtly toward the small girl in the corner. In a booth near the window, a well-dressed older woman shook her head with a quiet, pursed-lipped disapproval. A younger couple whispered to each other, casting sideways glances at Maya's table. The young waiter, who had first tried to turn her away, muttered something under his breath as he passed by Leo. "This is gonna be bad for business, boss," he hissed. Leo, still leaning against the counter, continued to watch Maya, his expression unreadable. His face was a mask of stoicism, but his eyes were locked on the girl. He had seen the world turn its back on people enough times to no longer care about the fleeting opinions of his customers. From across the room, a man in a crisp suit, his voice loud and entitled, raised his voice just enough to be heard. "Excuse me?" he called out, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "But this is a restaurant, isn't it? Not a soup kitchen." A few people chuckled nervously. Others looked down at their plates, embarrassed. Leo turned his head slowly, his gaze pinning the man in his seat. He responded, his voice low but carrying an authority that cut through the diner's noise. "And you are the judge of who deserves to eat?" The man's smile faltered. He shifted uncomfortably in his booth. "I'm just saying there's a time and a place for everything." "You're right, there is," Leo interrupted, his voice still quiet but now edged with steel. "And some people think the place for others is always far away from their own table." Silence. The man didn't reply. He fiddled with his napkin, pretending the exchange had never happened. Leo turned his attention back to Maya. She was just finishing her meal. She had scraped the plate clean, leaving not a single grain of rice, and had drunk the juice down to the last drop. Then, for the first time since she had entered, she looked around the room. The stares were still there, judging, weighing, speculating, but she didn't seem to see them. Her gaze scanned the room until it found Leo standing like a pillar by the counter. Their eyes met. With a shy, hesitant gesture, she brought her hand to her chest and then gave a small, solemn nod. It was a silent, profound thank you. Leo acknowledged it with a slight inclination of his own head. He then moved away from the counter, disappearing into the kitchen. He returned a moment later with a brown paper bag. Inside, he had placed a fresh loaf of bread, an apple, and a bottle of juice. He walked out of the diner with the bag in his hand, just as Maya was slowly getting up from her table, moving with the light, careful steps of someone who still couldn't believe what had just happened. He caught up with her on the sidewalk. "Here," he said, holding out the bag. "This is for your mother." Maya looked at the bag, then up at him. She still didn't smile, but her expression had changed. There was a tiny flicker of light in her eyes, like a candle being lit in a vast, dark room. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Leo just nodded and stood there watching as she walked away. But he didn't go back into the diner. Instead, he untied his apron, tossed it onto a chair just inside the door, and began to walk. He followed Maya's path, keeping a respectful distance, ensuring she didn't notice him. He followed her for 2 blocks, past a row of tired-looking storefronts and a bus stop crowded with people. He watched as she turned down a narrow alleyway, a shortcut he had never taken himself. He followed her past makeshift shelters and graffiti-covered walls, until he saw her turn a corner and disappear into a vacant, overgrown lot. At the back of the lot, hidden behind a cluster of weeds and discarded debris, stood a shack. It was a crude structure, pieced together from scrap wood and corrugated metal, with a sheet of blue plastic tacked over the roof. Maya slipped through a gap that served as a doorway. Leo stopped, concealing himself behind a crumbling brick wall. From his vantage point, he could see inside the shack. A woman, painfully thin, with pale skin and the same deep-set eyes as Maya, was sitting on a dirty mattress on the floor. The girl handed her the paper bag. The woman took it, her hands trembling, and then pulled her daughter into a tight, desperate hug. Leo lowered his eyes, a profound ache settling in his chest. He turned and walked back the way he came, his steps heavy, as if he were carrying a new weight on his shoulders. When he re-entered the diner, he didn't speak to anyone. He went straight to his small office in the back and pulled an old, faded photograph from a desk drawer. In the photo, a young boy sat on a curb, his clothes dirty, his arms wrapped around his knees. Beside him stood an old cook in a white, food-stained jacket, a kind smile on his face. Leo traced the image with his finger, his mind drifting back through the years. That little girl didn't know it, but he had once been her. He had known the gnawing pain of hunger, the shame of being invisible. The next morning, long before the diner opened its doors, Leo was already at work. He walked to the walk-in refrigerator and packed 2 steaming containers of last night's stew, a thermos of hot tea, and some fresh fruit into a sturdy paper bag. He didn't tell any of his staff what he was doing. He simply left on foot, retracing his steps from the day before. He knew the way now. He found the vacant lot and the small shack. He didn't knock. He didn't want to be seen. He placed the bag carefully in a discreet spot near the entrance, a place where it would surely be found. On top, he left a small folded note, "For the little girl and her mother. If you need more, I'm just around the corner." Then he turned and walked away. He returned to the diner, washed his hands, put on his apron, and began the day as if nothing had happened. He didn't mention it to his staff. He didn't answer their curious questions. He just served the first customers their coffee and toast, his expression as serious and unreadable as ever. He repeated the gesture for the next several days. He never appeared in person, never knocked on their makeshift door, but every morning, before the sun was fully up, he would pass by the same spot and leave a bag. Sometimes it was a hot meal. Sometimes it was fruit and bread. One day, it was a small folded blanket and a pair of clean socks. No signature, no demands. Just a quiet, consistent act of care. And though they didn't know who their silent benefactor was, Maya and her mother Maria began to wait for it. Maria, whose name Leo had learned from a brief conversation with a local social worker, was no longer so frail. The steady supply of nutritious food was helping. The medicine for her chronic cough, which Leo had started tucking into the bottom of the bag, was beginning to work. She still coughed, still felt the aches in her bones, but she could stand up now. She could help Maya comb her hair. She could dream, however faintly, of a day when they might leave this place. Leo watched their progress from a distance. When he passed by the lot on his way home in the evenings, he would sometimes see a light flickering inside the shack. He would sometimes hear the low murmur of their voices, or even a soft laugh. One day, he saw a drawing taped to the wooden exterior. It was a child's drawing of two figures holding hands, a small girl and a large man. There were no faces, just silhouettes. But he understood. The image stayed with him all night. He sat alone in his office, looking again at the old photograph of the boy on the curb. He remembered the smell of the hot soup that old cook had served him. He remembered the firm, kind hands that had placed the bowl on top of an overturned bucket. He remembered the first time someone had told him, "You don't have to do anything in return. Just eat." No one had done that for him since, until now. Because in some strange, inexplicable way, that little girl, with her quiet courage and her solemn nod of thanks, had given him something back. She had broken through a wall of cynicism he didn't even know he had built. The next morning, he didn't just leave food. Tucked inside the bag was a handwritten note. "I'd like to invite you to lunch again today. You and your mother. No strings attached, no shame. Just come. There's a table waiting for you." He signed it with his name, Leo, and the address of the diner. At 1 o'clock that afternoon they arrived. Maya came first, holding tightly to the hand of her mother, Maria. Maria wore an old but clean dress, her dark hair pulled back neatly, a touch of faded lipstick, a small, brave act of dignity. Her eyes, however, were filled with a deep, weary apprehension. They paused at the entrance, hesitating on the threshold between the harsh reality of the street and the warm, fragrant world of the diner. A few customers noticed them. The young waiter from the other day saw them and immediately went to alert Leo, who was in the kitchen overseeing the lunch service. He emerged at once, wiping his hands on his apron. He walked to the front door, and for the first time in days, a small, contained smile touched his lips. He opened his arm in a welcoming gesture, a silent invitation. "Come in," he said, his voice low and steady. "Your table is ready." He led them not to the corner table from before, but to a comfortable booth near the back, one that offered a bit more privacy. He sat with them, a gesture that immediately shifted the dynamic. He was no longer just the owner. He was their host. He ordered them the daily special, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, without even handing them a menu. He brought them tall glasses of fresh lemonade and a basket of warm bread. While they ate, he spoke very little, allowing them the space to eat in peace. He watched as Maria, like her daughter, ate slowly and deliberately, as if she were relearning the simple pleasure of a hot meal without fear or shame. Maya, feeling safer this time, looked around the diner with wide, curious eyes, taking in the sights and sounds. Only after the plates were cleared and a dessert of warm apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream was placed before them did Leo finally speak. He took a deep breath, leaned forward slightly, and looked directly at Maria. In a quiet, even voice, he told them his story. "I grew up on the streets too," he said, his words simple and unadorned. "My parents left me when I was 7. I slept in bus terminals, dug for food in trash cans. I learned early that the world is a hard place." Amaya listened. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning recognition. Maria covered her mouth with her hand, her own eyes filling with tears. "Then one day," Leo continued, "a man gave me a bowl of soup. He was an old cook at a diner much like this one. He didn't ask me any questions, he didn't judge me, he just fed me. And because of him, I survived. Because of him, I eventually became who I am today." He paused, the silence in the booth thick with shared understanding. "I'm not trying to be anyone's hero," he said, his gaze steady and sincere. "But if I'm in a position to do for someone else what was done for me, then I feel it's my obligation to do it." He looked at Maria, his expression serious but kind. "If you're willing," he said, "you can start working here. It's not heavy work. A morning shift, helping in the kitchen, prepping vegetables, organizing supplies. I can offer you a steady paycheck with taxes taken out properly and a transportation pass. Everything by the book." Maria began to cry, silent tears of overwhelming relief and disbelief streaming down her face. Maya reached out and grabbed her mother's arm, her small face a mask of shock and hope. Leo then turned to Maya. "And you," he said gently, "are going to school. There's a good public school just a few blocks from here. I already checked. They have a spot for you. And whatever you need, books, supplies, a backpack, we'll figure it out." The little girl didn't answer, but for the first time, a real, genuine smile spread across her face. It was a small, hesitant smile, almost shy, but it was as bright and transformative as the sun breaking through a week of storm clouds. Leo stood up, clearing his throat, and discreetly wiped his own eyes with the corner of his napkin. He turned to the kitchen staff, who had been watching the scene unfold. "Prepare a uniform for our new employee," he called out, "and set aside a nice pencil case for our new student." The kitchen erupted in a small, spontaneous round of applause. And on that day, in that ordinary diner, where everything was usually measured by time and profit and plates served, time seemed to stop for a moment, because the unthinkable had happened. Not charity, but a chance. Not a handout, but a hand up. Dignity restored. Maria arrived for her first day of work wearing clothes given to her by one of the other cooks, simple black pants and a clean white t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, a gesture that spoke of her determination to appear professional, but her eyes were still filled with a nervous uncertainty. Maya sat quietly on a stool in the corner of the kitchen, a brand new notebook and a small set of colored pencils on her lap. Leo had bought them for her, telling her it was just a loan until her official school supplies arrived. In the beginning, Maria was clumsy. She fumbled with the industrial dishwasher, put the forks in the wrong drawer, and apologized for everything, her eyes constantly darting around as if she expected to be fired at any moment. But no one yelled, no one rushed her. Leo's kitchen ran on a quiet current of mutual respect. For the first few weeks, the other employees were wary. They whispered amongst themselves, their curiosity mixed with a touch of resentment. But gradually, the silence of routine took over. Maya, sitting in her corner, began to draw. She drew the diner, the customers, a waiter with a funny nose, a cook with a flower tucked behind her ear, and she drew Leo. She always drew him standing by the counter, arms crossed, serious. But in her drawings, there was always one different detail. He was smiling. She had never seen him smile like that, but perhaps that was how she saw him on the inside. On the third week, Maya started school. Leo drove her there himself on her first day. He didn't say much on the way, but when they arrived, he walked her to the front door. Maria cried when she saw her daughter in the navy blue school uniform, holding her new lunchbox. It was the first time Maya had ever attended a real school. No one knew that she had already taught herself to read, deciphering words from discarded packaging, street signs, and old newspapers they used to line their shelter. Now she would have real books and friends. Maria, in turn, began to change. She walked with more confidence. She gained some weight, and color returned to her cheeks. During her lunch break, she ate with the other staff members, slowly joining their conversations. In the evenings, she helped close up the diner. One night, Leo arrived early and saw her wiping down the front windows, humming a soft tune to herself. He didn't say anything, but he smiled. A real, private smile. Over time, even the regular customers began to notice. Maria was attentive. She learned their names, remembered their usual orders. Maya would sometimes appear at the kitchen door after school, and a few of the regulars would wave or say hello. They became part of the fabric of the place. But what was most remarkable was Leo's quiet consistency. He never boasted about what he had done. He never told the story. If anyone asked, he would simply say, "She works here. Her daughter goes to school nearby. That's all." But everyone knew. They knew about the bags of food left on the sidewalk. They knew about the meal on the first day. They knew about his gaze. It was respect, not charity. One afternoon, Maya drew a picture of a heart with 3 stick figures inside, a woman, a little girl, and a large man in an apron. She folded the paper carefully and handed it to Leo before she left for the day. He didn't open it right away. He tucked it into his pocket. Only later, when he was alone in his office, did he unfold the drawing. He looked at it for a long time, then leaned his head against the wall, his eyes glistening. He didn't cry easily, but something in that simple, heartfelt drawing had broken through. The next day, he installed a small, low shelf near the cash register. On it, he placed a handwritten sign, "If you are hungry and ashamed to ask, take what you need. No one will judge you here." He stocked it with wrapped sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a few containers of the previous day's soup, packaged with care. Some of his staff were skeptical. They asked if he wasn't worried it would attract the wrong kind of people. Leo just looked at them and said, "If it attracts hungry people, then it's attracting the right kind of people." That very same day, just before closing, he saw a young boy slip into the diner, grab a small bag of bread from the shelf, and run out without looking back. Leo didn't say a word. He just watched and remembered himself, years ago, doing the exact same thing in a bakery, his heart pounding with fear. Maya, who was waiting for her mother, saw it too. She whispered to Leo, "He has the same look in his eyes that I used to have." Leo nodded, his gaze meeting hers with a deep, shared understanding. "That's why it's worth it," he said. At the end of the month, Maya's school held a small performance for the parents. Maria asked for the afternoon off, her voice trembling with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Leo insisted on going with them. He put on a clean shirt, combed his hair, and walked into the school auditorium with a quiet gravity, as if attending the most important business meeting of his life. Maya, looking small on the big stage, recited a simple poem about gratitude. When she finished, her eyes scanned the audience searching. When she found Leo and her mother sitting together, the smile that broke across her face was brighter than any spotlight. Leo didn't stand up or cheer. He just sat there, his hands clasped in his lap, and gave her a slow, approving nod. It was enough. She knew he was there. She knew she was no longer alone in the world. Time passed. The end of the year arrived, bringing with it the first chill of winter, the bustle of the holidays, and the noisy cheer of crowded streets. But inside Leo's diner, a serene rhythm had taken hold. The silverware continued to clink, the plates were still served with care, and at the heart of it all was the quiet, steady routine of 3 lives intertwined. The transformation was undeniable. Maria now smiled with her eyes, her posture that of a woman who had reclaimed her own worth. She was respected by the staff, treated as a peer. She knew the place of every pot and pan, the preference of every regular customer. No one whispered anymore. No one pointed. She and Maya now lived in a small, clean room they rented with her salary. It was modest, but it was safe. For the first time in years, they had a bed of their own. And Maya, she wore her school uniform with pride. She read with a fluency that amazed her teachers and arrived at the diner every afternoon with her hair neatly tied back and her backpack slung over her shoulder. Sometimes she helped fold napkins. Sometimes she just appeared to say hello. But whenever Leo was near, she would greet him with that small, almost conspiratorial nod, as if they shared a secret no one else could understand. Leo never spoke of them as a special case. He never gave interviews to the local paper about his good deed. He never told the full story to anyone. But those who paid attention saw the change in him too. He started listening more to his employees, asking about their families. He instituted a fair rotation for holiday shifts. One day, he offered to pay for a food handling certification course for anyone who wanted to advance in the kitchen. The next, he started buying extra food, not for the shelf up front, but for a quiet donation to a local shelter done without fanfare for anyone who came asking, with no explanation needed. One afternoon, as he was wiping down the counter, Maya approached him with her report card. She held it out to him, her expression a mixture of shyness and pride. He took it without a word and read it. Her grades were all excellent. At the bottom, in the comments section, her teacher had written, "Maya is a true example to her peers. She is dedicated, polite, and exceptionally compassionate toward others. It is an honor to have her in our class." Leo folded the report card and looked at the little girl. "Do you like school?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes shining. "Are you going to keep studying?" "I am," she replied with a firm resolve. "One day I want to write a book with my mother's story, and mine too." Leo was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn bookmark. It was a simple piece of leather, with a phrase handwritten on it in faded ink. "Those who look at your outside can never imagine the world you carry within." He handed it to Maya. "When you write your book," he said, "use this to remember." She took the bookmark carefully, holding it as if it were the most valuable thing she had ever touched. "Thank you," Leo smiled. For the first time, it was a full, genuine, unguarded smile. It was light. That night, the diner closed early. A heavy rainstorm had rolled in, and the power flickered for a few minutes, sending the last of the customers scurrying home. As the staff cleaned up, Leo stood at the front door, watching the rain wash over the empty street. Across the way, he saw a boy huddled under an awning, a thin backpack his only shield against the downpour. He was maybe 10 years old, skinny, with worn-out clothes and the same haunted, wary look in his eyes. The same hunched posture of someone carrying the weight of the world. Leo watched him for a moment. Then, without a second thought, he did what had now become second nature. He went inside, grabbed a package of bread and an apple, put them in a plastic bag to keep them dry, and walked out into the rain. He crossed the street and handed the bag to the boy. He didn't ask any questions. He just looked at him, nodded, and walked away. The boy clutched the bag to his chest as if it were gold and disappeared into the rainy darkness. Leo returned to the now empty diner. He switched off the lights one by one, leaving only the warm glow of the neon Leo's Diner sign in the window. Before he left, he stopped by the small shelf near the cash register. He looked at the remaining containers of food, straightened the loaves of bread, and replaced the old, simple sign with a new one. In its place, he wrote, "Here, you don't need permission to be treated with respect." He locked the door and started his walk home. Halfway down the block, he passed Maya and Maria, huddled together under a large umbrella. They smiled when they saw him. Maria wished him a good night. Maya gave him her small, knowing wave. Leo just nodded back and continued on his way. But deep down, he knew that without any fanfare, without any headlines or applause, something extraordinary had happened. A simple story about an invisible girl, a plate of food, and a gesture that could never be captured in a social media post. A story that no one needed to applaud because its power was in its silence. What would you have done if you saw a child asking to wash dishes in exchange for food? Leo could have turned his back. He could have just served a single plate and moved on with his life. But he chose something more. He chose to restore the dignity of someone who just needed a chance. Because sometimes what saves a life isn't how much you give. It's how you choose to see the person no one else is looking at.